Good afternoon, everyone. We're at South Summit here, surrounded by companies that create a lot of wealth, innovation, and employment. In this panel, we're going to talk about these better companies that do all of that, but at the same time, manage to tackle the most pressing social and environmental issues that we have in front. So we have a very excited panel with 4 companies that are doing a fantastic job addressing these issues while at the same time proposing like a sustainable proposal. So we have with us Juliet from Crowd Farming. Pablo Vinajeras from Garrigues, Open Innovation. Michael Gear from Humanity. And Margarita Albors from Social Nest. Okay, so let's start with Michael, who is a serial entrepreneur. You've created many global companies, one of the first dating apps with presence in 30 countries, more than 3 million users. Another privacy VPN with more than 900 million downloads. And now yet again, founding a company called Humanity to provide with a better lives for all of us. So what can you tell us about your personal journey? Like how do you come up with Humanity and how is it different now?
Yep. Yeah, first of all, great to be here at South Summit. Great to be here on the panel with everybody else. Yeah, so I kind of took my co-founder, I always say, like, he always wanted to be an entrepreneur. His name's Pete Ward. And he followed his dreams and succeeded. I wanted to be an astronaut. But we'll all buy tickets eventually, so it's going to work out. But that kind of brought me to go over to Moscow, actually, back in the day, and met a guy, and we ended up creating Badoo, as you referenced. So learn the power of basically creating something and then having millions of people, use it. I think we got like 12 million users our first year. Like we didn't really know what we were doing; it just happened. But once you get a taste for that, then you start looking around and thinking, like, what else can you do with this power to get millions of people, to join something? And unfortunately, I think, and this is common to a lot of people that get into the health space, is, we have experiences in our life that make us really understand the cliche that, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. On my side, I had a close relative get stage 4 breast cancer, get diagnosed in stage 4, passed away within about 12 months of that. And my co-founder, his dad had a stroke just out of the blue when he was 61. And so what we, set out to do eventually was, and after doing the consumer VPN, was basically, how can we use our skills that we have to get millions of people to join something and stay active on an app? How can we use those skills to make people healthier? And that's what led to Humanity. We actually figured out that we could monitor people's digital biomarkers, and to be more specific, your movement patterns, your heart rate pattern if you have a wearable, and we could actually give you a concrete feedback loop, to how your health is actually doing, and we compare that to a longitudinal data set, but I won't get into all the details. And so we saw that as we were creating that, and as we were working on the consumer VPN, we saw there was so much good that companies could do as vehicles to actually create, good in the world. And there's, we'll talk about it more on the panel, but like there's so many ways that you can actually, that it makes the company stronger, it makes it easier to, recruit and all these kind of things. So, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Michael. Juliet, you founded and are the CEO of Crowd Farming.
Yes.
Pretty much a case study of what a profit-driven social impact business could be, revolutionizing the supply chain of fresh produce all across Europe, dignifying the lives of producers and providing with healthy food in the tables of consumers. So what challenges do you see as pretty much a social business, and what advantages you see in escalating and getting the critical mass across Europe that you are achieving?
Okay, that's an interesting question. First of all, I must say I might be partial because I really do believe we can do good and we can scale up. So I prefer to say so at the beginning. I'll start with the advantages. I think they're the most obvious, and especially you, Michael, you were mentioning recruiting. So I think it's the first thing. I think in terms for a startup, it's always a bit hard to find talent. And when you have a clear purpose and people share that, first of all, you have more people willing to join your company. And then they feel like they're part of the company and that it's theirs, really, because they believe in the purpose of the company. So I think that would be the first advantage for sure. And then it's also the ability, in our case, to innovate. As you were saying, we're trying to change the current food supply chain, which is not working. So we need to invent everything. Because if we do the same as others are doing, then it's not going to make sense. So it's hard, because you need to rethink everything, all the processes, all the things you've seen before. But it's also, it makes you stronger in the end, I think, because you need to think out of the box. In terms of customers also, I think we all know it, but it's true, people are not willing to buy anymore from companies they don't share the values from. So it's very important. And if you do what you say, then you have a clear competitive advantage. So that's what we're trying to do. It's not easy to do, but I think it makes a difference, and that's why people then follow you, and you have really clear customers actually talking about you and promoting you without you doing anything, which is like this sense of community, of being part of something. So it's very important. And for us, we are a marketplace, so we put like in contact producers and consumers, and it also work on the producer side. Producers at first, they join us because they want to earn a fair living, which is fine, but then they actually stay with us because they believe we're giving a meaning again to their job. So I would say like the advantages are lots of them, but it's true that there are some challenges, as you were saying. So the first thing I would say would be mainly access to capital and investment in general, because first of all, many times, and especially for us at the beginning, it was like, oh, great idea. Nice, you're nice people, but you're a bit idealist, right? It's not going to work. So we had like, I had a feeling we had to push even more to demonstrate we were growing double digits, and apart from that, we were profitable. So it made sense. But we were feeling like we really need to prove more, because as we were talking about doing good things, apart from that, it was not that clear for some investors. But I think the market is changing generally, and that they see the interest in that. And then, of course, it's just a question when you're growing, you need to accept that if you do things differently, probably the standards by which we used to grow are not valid anymore. In our case, for example, we currently work with 200 more or less producers in Europe. Probably we've been working with them for a few years, and in 4 years we could have thousands of producers if we wanted to. But of course, we didn't do that because we're trying not to sell the food as a commodity, but really to explain what's behind the food that you're eating and actually promote the farmers and their stories. And this is much harder to scale. So, of course, it takes more time, and that can be also a reason why sometimes you're more challenged by investors in general, because you cannot just automate everything. In that case, it wouldn't make sense. You would just ruin the model. So I think that would be the summary.
Thank you. So let's continue on that. Margarita, you run your foundation. You're doing amazing jobs in your hometown in Valencia, trying to promote the social ecosystem. Now you're organizing events to connect social businesses with investors in Europe and LATAM. It's a wonderful job that you're doing. So you're a great antenna of what investors are thinking and what companies are facing. So what would you see as the main sentiment today of the investment community towards this impact-driven business?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Pablo. Hi, everyone. Well, I think that, as Juliette was saying, the interest is growing, and that's a fact. There's more and more capital coming into the sector. Impact investing sector is growing globally, and that I think it's very good news. And it's true that this appetite of people who have capital or managed capital is there, but at the same time we see that the need of new capital coming, it's very, very needed. And there's also the need of understanding the diversity of funding that the startups that are looking for having an impact need along their way, right? As Juliette was saying too, you need to prove as a startup that you can be profitable and have an impact. But it's true that sometimes, because the startups are doing something new and some things that many times are really complex, like solving social and environmental challenges that are difficult, are needed or require several players also to collaborate, makes the need of investment or the perspective of investors, the people who have capital, that really are aligned with that too. We are seeing, as I was saying, more interest of private investors, of people who are high net worth individuals. Next Gens, for example, are a very interesting group of people who are willing to align their capital with their values. We are seeing new players also coming into funding startups and providing catalytic capital, like, for example, foundations or even corporations can be also a new player coming. So definitely it's growing, and I think it's good news, but at the same time, we need to still work on creating awareness, because we come from this bipolar world where on one hand, we thought that our investments will just be for having the maximum return in terms of capital or doing philanthropy. And for many people, on all these new players, I was saying, like public administration, corporations, even foundations or investors, still have these kind of two pockets, right? And separate pockets, and I'm doing totally different things. And for them to know that there's a possibility of doing both things is still new, and really how to do it, they need really guidance. That's why from the foundation, as Pablo was saying, we have an initiative which is called FI, where we work with those investors to educate them about the opportunities that impact investing represents, and also to inspire them and show them cases, successful cases, where they can see that's a reality, that they can have impact and returns. And we are doing that not only here, but also in Europe, and willing to connect European investors with Latin American opportunities where there's a lot of things to do too. And also for the startups, for example, understanding their funding models, because getting VC funding, it's something that is applicable to startups at some point and specific models, but there are other types of capital, as I was saying, like catalytic capital, venture debt, and others that can also play a very important role in the development of the startups and in their success. So then VC capital can come later on. And again, the startups need this type of also to support. So we are, for example, running programs for investment readiness and also funding, so they can find their best funding model and the best funders for their startups in every stage.
Thank you, Margarita. And Pablo, you advise hundreds of transactions, financing, M&A, restructuring, all sorts of transactions with different companies. How is it different in the case of socially driven companies? How do you incorporate these factors into the equation? Are the deal terms different? Do you measure the impact of these companies in structuring these opportunities?
Well, a good question. Quite interesting. Yes, it's different, I would say. We as lawyers, I do not see myself as a lawyer. We are more a travel companion. We're partners, and at the end, everyone wins whenever the project develops. And at least that's our mindset when we advise startup companies, which is quite different to other traditional standards. We usually tend to find similar intricacies and challenges, and even though there are challenges, the fact that there are challenges and the scope and the aim is sustainable, certainly it's more encourageable. There's encouragement and satisfying at the end. And what we focus is trying to provide advice to the board of directors, to the founders. How can they measure whether in fact they are complying with these sustainable guidelines? Also try to implement plans, try to focus that in fact there's the proper diversity is challenging, and also that human rights are foreseen. We even have advice and compensation plans by means of which we established variables related to sustainable items, which certainly help. We focus on providing an analysis that the entire value chain of the companies inherits and taking into account each member. Juliet was explaining that it's just bringing the people and the producers, that everyone has the focus of which is the main aim. And the idea of doing that obviously involves us, but the thresholds and the guidelines are a bit more rigid than usual. And they have to be implemented. And also, when you take that into account towards the VC standards and the diversity of stakeholders, that's something that is challenging, but certainly is the good to liaise with, because when you manage to bring projects to the end, bring investment to the companies, and identify that they can grow and the projects can progress, certainly it's more satisfying than other projects.
Of course.
If you tell me if we have an impact, how do we see it? Yes, we see it. I think that the law is a source, a tool that allows to handle the challenges of society, and we are one of the players that can help to really convert the society in a more fairer, sustainable. And if we do not do it together, and we as lawyers do not provide our input and our effort, certainly we're not doing our job. So of course we have an impact. It is important, and we believe that it is part of our advice.
Thank you. Let's continue with one of the main challenges that we see, which is capital availability. Following what Margarita was saying, Michael, you've been in the market fundraising for like traditional businesses.
Yep.
Now definitely humanity has a higher purpose.
We created a lot of babies with that. There's people on Earth today.
So is there such there's clearly better companies, but is there better investors? Mm-hmm. Those in the big investment industry that can fund you being more patient or even allowing lesser returns? Is there such an animal in the investment community, or you have to go to the traditional pools of capital within your theme?
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely a believer that there's not less returns because the basis of how this works is you're creating something that solves a core need of either the person or the community. So it's obviously going to create a great business. I think so I see this on both sides, right? So we're raising money. We're actually raising for our Series A now for humanity, so come talk to me. But we basically, so I've raised money for companies, but I also LP into different funds. I'm a horrible angel investor, so I LP so that other people make better decisions for me. But, so just to give you one example, so I LP, the LP is when you're the investor that invests into a fund, and then the VCs divvy out that money. And so I LP'd into lower carbon because I'm very, it's a climate change fund, but I very much did that being like, hey, climate change is a really big problem. I would like to think that at least my money is going to solve it, but it's a really big problem, so it's actually going to have a lot of returns too, right? If these companies are successful, it's the biggest problem that we're facing. How could it not have good returns, right? And I think when we went out, so it's not about the returns, but it is, as you pointed out, it is about, so if we're creating, and Juliet kind of pointed this out, like if you're creating a lot of different stuff to make the thing work, the patience of the capital, as you said, so like is a lot of VC funds, they want to get their return, say, in 4 to 5 years, or in that time frame, sometimes they have to. They won't be built to really sit around and it might take you 10 years to make this thing amazing. And I know 10 years sounds like a long time, but like name me almost any big tech company that you know, and it's been around for more than 10 years, and you probably didn't hear about it until it was around for about 7 or 8 years. And so it's actually like the biggest companies that make the biggest difference in the world, it takes time to incubate, and so the patience of the capital, if the capital is able to wait, if the investor is able to wait with checkpoints, but wait, and see this thing through and help you raise the next rounds and all that kind of stuff, that's the investors that we need in the impact space, because usually, not always, but usually if you're solving big problems that are facing everybody in the audience and ourselves, those do take quite bigger projects to build and longer time to build. And so that's the biggest difference I see on the investment side.
Totally agree. Thank you. So, Juliet, there's no doubt that your company has this higher purpose of trying to dignify the life of producers and allow healthier food for clients. But how do you measure, how do you communicate, and how do you translate those impacts, both internally and externally, to make them advantages for your company?
Okay. Well, I think the first thing you said is to measure exactly what you want to do. Because if you don't measure, you don't know if it's happening or if it's not happening. It's like the basis. So I think that's the first thing, and we're working on that, because sometimes there are some things you cannot measure so easily. So we're working on that, and it's a question of really being on the ground with, in our case, the producers. We have agronomists working on the ground with them, and actually working on more sustainable agriculture techniques. So this is like part of the thing, is also to accept that it takes time, as we were saying, and that it takes lots of implication of the team. In terms of communication, I think we have KPIs, very clear ones, and we communicate them to the team. And then we have very demanding customers in our side, and even producers. So they're asking us for more information. We actually created a blog and a podcast with very detailed information about how we work, what is sustainable agriculture, what are we talking about non-sustainable farming, why is it such a problem for CO2 emissions. And I think it's just something that people are asking for. Because, for example, in our case, and it's the case in many sectors, we get so much information every day, but we don't really know what's true or not. And we're kind of lost. And in the end, you have people asking, for example, for us, it's obvious, but we had so many questions at the beginning, I'm German. Is organics the same in Spain? Yes, it's a European. But it seems obvious, but it's not so obvious. And there were people not buying from organic Spanish farmers because they were saying it's not the same. I heard in Spain they don't do it the right way. So we're really working on that, on giving the right information and trying to be extremely precise, technical, and of course, at the same time, to be close to the people, to explain in very simple terms, because otherwise we start talking about very technical things and no one understands what's happening. So I think the key is there, and it's part of our communication to the consumers, to the farmers, and even to the investors. When we need to explain to investors, it takes 3 years, more or less, for a farmer to go to organic and to transition. And during these 3 years, you cannot sell their product as organic. Well, you need to explain, because otherwise they're going to say, why aren't you selling as organic this product? Because I can't. And I explain to you why, and it's good. I mean, it's nature, it takes time. So I think it's just a question of having the right KPIs and explaining why you're choosing those, and then evolving, of course, because as the business grows, you need to go into more and more detailed KPIs, and maybe some for some products, for some areas, and others for other topics.
Thank you. And following up on what Michael was saying, there's this trade-off in our mind that if you are doing good, you cannot do as well, so you have to be less profitable. On the other side, in the industry, there's this trend of trying to discover and to demonstrate that there is what they call impact alpha. The companies with a higher purpose can hire better and retain talent better with these mission-driven companies that can capture and retain consumers as well. They can access more efficient capital and hence create more long-term value. However, the ecosystem is still very young, so there is no historical data to demonstrate this impact alpha. What do you think? Do you
Well, I think there are starting to have some reports, some data around that. In fact, this morning we were talking with a person from B Corp saying that they are doing some reports around that, and they have found that B Corp companies who are these purpose-driven for-profit companies, and comparing to companies similar in the terms of number of years that they have been operating on sectors, etc., they are selling like 3 times more than non-purpose-driven companies. So we are starting having some data. And well, and apart from that, I think that there's a point that we all need to kind of think about it, which is apart from having the need to prove that they can scale, that they can be impactful, I think that we all need to see what's the world that we want to see in the future, and what is our part, the role that we can play in doing that. Where are we going to put our money as investors, or how we want to consume, or how can we innovate within the organizations or the public administration to change things for the better. So sometimes I think that there's a lot of pressure for the startups to prove things, but I think that the thing is that the ecosystem that is the one that needs also to change in order to support the startups to grow. Otherwise, they alone can't change the things. And I think there's a lot to do in our side, in the side of the players that are around to support the solutions that are being created, and try to align that with the challenges, because they really require the best of us to do so.
Can you share your experience? You're working with top-notch scientists around the world. Like, how is it different with humanity?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of part and parcel of it's easier to hire and retain, but it's when you go, so humanity, we're basically using your biomarkers to then guide you towards actual better health, so being healthy for longer. And so when we go to, name the top science researcher or top scientist, we actually have found that it's just so much easier. Like if we were some less like big impact kind of commercial operation, we would go and they would be like, oh, you're a startup, you only have, we have 100,000 users, but you only have a certain size. When we go with this big, we're going to change this thing, this big vision, we find that all those doors are open. People are just really happy because they've spent their lives dedicated to changing this thing, whether it be in cancer research or, preventative medicine of some sort. And when they find a quite, quick-moving organization, which a startup is, that comes and shares that vision, I think that makes it so much easier for us to talk to anybody that we want in the world, basically. So.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very, very exciting panel, and it's been great to get to know your experiences in scaling these better companies. I think in a couple years' time, it'll become evident that scaling better companies, it's much easier than the traditional ones. But thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you.